Welcome back to the Table Rush Talk Show. I'm your host, Mischa Zvegansoff, and today I'm thrilled to share an enlightening conversation with Joanie and Steve Sigal, the dynamic duo behind the groundbreaking addiction podcast, Point of No Return. Their journey from corporate life to podcast pioneers is not just inspiring, but a beacon of hope for many. Join us as we explore how they've turned their passion into a powerful platform for change, leveraging the art of storytelling to combat one of the most pressing challenges of our time, addiction. Welcome, Joanie and Steve.
Thank you, Mischa. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Indeed. And how you ended up here is I'm usually not talking about this too often, but I am in the recovery community, and you graciously had me on your podcast, and I got to talk about, a little bit of my journey and how I've been able to help people get sober and things like that. And you graciously said you'd come on my show, but from what I understand, your podcast, the addiction podcast, Point of No Return, is one of the number one podcasts in the nation or the world that focuses on this type of content.
Well, probably in the nation, which would probably make it the world. We've got the way how kind of statistics for podcasts is downloads. We have close to 900,000 downloads at this point. We've been doing this for about 7 years. We've got about 380 interviews. Our podcast is all guest interviews, kind of like yours, right?
Yes.
And it's all stories. And the intention is to give people hope. And when they hear stories from people that have been through the grinder, so to speak, right, and come out the other end, it's inspiring. So that's what we've done.
Fantastic. And really quick, before we get going too deep, everybody who's listening and or watching, you can go to patreon.com/the addiction podcast, follow along, join the community, perhaps donate, and we'll dive into that a little bit more in a bit. But for now, definitely go to patreon.com/the addiction podcast and be sure to join the community and donate if you like what you're hearing and such. So very interestingly, as I was digging into your podcast, and the number one assumption is, well, you two must be recovering alcoholics or addicts or something like that. So I dig deep and I find, quote, it literally says, you did not do this because you are former addicts. You did not do this because you have loved ones who are addicts. You do this because you feel that addiction is one of the biggest problems facing the world today. So, I mean, you're later in life. I didn't mean to say it like that,
true.
But
It's true.
So talk to me. Like, there's so many places you could spend time, money, effort, resources. Why addiction?
Go ahead, Joanie.
Well, when we started podcasting, I was going in a completely different direction that was just kind of frou-frou or foo-well. I was podcasting about my silver hair that you can see. But a mentor in the area of podcasting said, podcast about something you're passionate about. And we looked around and just looked at the fact that addiction is one of the biggest problems facing this country, if not all countries. And, you could take the viewpoint that it doesn't have anything to do with me because I don't have a history of addiction. My family doesn't. And I could take that viewpoint, but that's not a very embracing or humanitarian viewpoint. And actually, I believe it affects all of us. And probably one of the very first episodes we did was with a gentleman who had lost his son to an overdose. And that makes me very emotional when a parent tells me that they've lost a child to addiction. And that, I'm a mom, okay? So that affects me. That has something to do with me. Whether it's my child or your child or somebody down the street, I can't turn a blind eye to that and say that has nothing to do with me. And so we just decided we need to take whatever responsibility we can for this situation.
Mhm. Thank you for that. And so inspiring. This is a marketing podcast, the Table Rush Talk Show. A table rush is where, Tony Robbins speaks from stage and he inspires everybody and he offers his program and everybody rushes to the table in the back of the room to buy, hence table. Yeah, hence Table Rush. And of course, I'm in recovery and what have you in those modalities. So trying to serve in that way as well. But so I thought what would be fun for us to talk about a little bit is you've been able to, any marketers listening to this going, why are we talking about addiction or things like that? Well, A, because it affects us all and we should all care and be supportive of recovery, I believe, as best we can. But also, you have grown a number one podcast. You've been able to achieve downloads. You've been able to get significant speakers on your podcast. And so, as marketers, gosh, we should all achieve, strive for that, right?
That's right. Well,
So,
just as a
yeah, go
quick
ahead.
comment on that, that's true. That's the subject matter, and it's interesting. But from a marketing perspective, we came from a marketing company, and we still have a small marketing company, mainly email marketing, which we've done for 20 years. And we go, and we work out of our house. I've been through the corporate environment. I've been the vice president of marketing for a very large technology firm, and we said, what should we do? How do we expand without getting back into the corporate environment, right? And so we happened to go to this corporate kind of a event, and I think it was in Orlando or Tampa. And some guy gets up there and he starts talking about podcasting. We go, well, what's a podcast? He starts talking about the Horse Network, right, Joanie?
Horse Radio Network.
Horse Radio Network.
And his name is Glenn the Geek.
Glenn the Geek. He's he's got like 7 podcasts all about horses, and he's got a huge following, right? So we go, all right, let's look into this, right? We didn't drop what we were doing, but we went to 2 conferences to learn podcasting. I mean, there's the equipment part of it, right? There's the how do you get people to listen or watch or whatever, right? So we did our homework, right? And then we took his advice, and he said, do something you're passionate about, which Joanie told you. We go, wait, for that subject matter, people can do this on any subject matter, right? But we just started. We didn't wait for somebody to say it was okay. We didn't wait for, people to say you're not going to make it, right? And I just picked up we happened to have had a contact with Pam Bondi, who was the former Attorney General of the state of Florida, right? And we got her on our podcast because she wanted to talk about pill mills, right? Which were all over Florida, right? And then I was reading the paper, and there was this deputy
Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Joint Chiefs of Staff, the United States, whose son died of, was it a heroin or opioid?
It was a heroin overdose.
Overdose. And I called him up, and he goes, sure. So I go, wait a second. Our job is to provide a lifeline, a way. So from a marketing communication, really what we're doing is using a rapidly growing media to communicate something. Now, granted, there's thousands of podcasts. You have to break through and so forth. And what we did was we just persisted, and it grew because the word of mouth, we do not have we have a backlog, right? So that's how it's grown. And so for listeners that want to know about marketing, right? Podcasting for us it also fit our lifestyle.
And Mischa,
Yeah,
one of the keynotes about marketing, I think, and I've gone all over the Tampa Bay area and talked about email marketing to small and mid-sized businesses. I think one of the key things is consistency. And that's what we did with podcasting. We have put up a weekly episode for almost 7 years. I think we're 3 shy of 7 years. And we just keep it going because the problem is still out there and people need help and they need to know that there's help available. They want hope. And we just consistently every week put up an episode, I like to think that there are people who expect it and know that it's coming and listen to it. And that's a keynote with any marketing, whether you're going to send out postcards or send emails or do social media. And this is something we kind of have down, and that's just like consistency. Let's just keep going. Let's just do it week after week after week. And it just grew with, where we were going after people to be on the podcast. And sometimes we still do if there's someone that we want to, but mostly people just come to us. I'll give you an example of going after it. One of our guests spoke about a series that was on Netflix. This was a couple of years ago, I think, and it was called Dope Sick. And I went to Netflix and I watched the first episode, and I said to Steve, I said, we have to do a panel about this. It's all about Purdue Pharma and their criminal and unethical marketing practices. And I said, we need to get the people on there. So, he reached out and he got the author of the book, Dope Sick, and he got the director of the series, and he got the actual U.S. attorney who was played by Peter Sarsgaard in the series. He actually got him on the podcast and his boss, John Brownlee, on the podcast. So something like that excites us, we go after our guests. But from there, pretty much people reach out, like you reached out to us, wanting to tell your story.
Yeah, I think you just spoke to so many bits of the power of podcasting. And I talk about 6 main benefits of podcasting and a hidden 7th. However, you spoke to a few of those. There's obviously the call to action where you can guide somebody, hey, click on badzuck.com and you can learn more about going on a podcast tour. But sometimes you meet that person and then they refer you to another person, right? And that's a big benefit. And that person refers you to another person. And the next thing you know, the spider web goes out and you have these amazing collaborations, right?
That's right.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Tell me about those. Yeah, tell me about those conversations, and we'll come back to the marketing in a minute. But I've read a lot about obviously just being involved in the recovery community. I know a lot about the book Dope Sick, and there's others. There's I can't remember some of them.
Painkiller, I think, is one.
Yeah, we had the writer of that book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fascinating conversations, hopeful conversations, sad conversations, a little bit of both. Tell me about those conversations a little bit. What were your big takeaways, or
A little bit of everything. I mean, it's before somebody after about a year, we also started putting our podcast up on YouTube, right? It's no longer just an audio one, and we started with social media, and it runs the gamut, right? There's, especially when we talk to parents, right? We interviewed the head of a couple of parents groups that lost their children to fentanyl, right?
yeah,
You want to talk grief and sadness, right? There it is. But these women, especially, right? They don't mess with them anymore. They're walking into their legislator's office finally, right? Saying, I don't care. You better do something, right? So there's a real positive intent there, right? When we talk to former addicts, especially that have been in jail or so forth, right? A whole lot of them are out there in front of school kids now. They're going, it's kind of like, don't be me, right? They're out there. Michael De Leon is a good example. He did 700 schools last year, right? So then there is sometimes the addict that most of them have been through rehab at least 4 or 5 times. We had one actor who been through 52 rehabs, right?
oh my goodness.
And so, we try to make sure they come up with some positive perspective on it. We've had a lot of authors on, right? And say, if you have a message to give somebody that might, because our attention's on the listener, right? It's like, what's going to give them hope, right? That's why our podcast is branded Point of No Return, because we always ask as they tell their story, at what point in your life did you decide you had to change, or you were going to die, right? Or you were going to, completely down. That, believe it or not, gives a lot of hope to people, especially who they go, wait a second, I need to make that decision. I need to make that decision. So hopefully that gives you some perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that answer. I think it was so powerful, just giving people a platform to tell their story. I love this saying. What is it? The my mess is my message, and out of a lot of that messy addiction, lots of stories of hope. Obviously, tons of tragedy, but we do get to hear, and I do get to meet people myself where, families are breaking those cycles of addiction. They're breaking the chain of addiction and starting a new rebirth, shall we say.
Yeah.
But that's really cool that you're able to get such impactful people on the podcast who are writing movies, writing books, acting, or the actual people. I imagine talking to the you know the politicians is always interesting, and and so
Yeah.
God bless you for doing that.
Well, and we talked to a sheriff because there's a lot of controversy, about the border and the fentanyl coming over the border. And we talked to a gentleman who is a sheriff in a border town in Texas.
It was Arizona,
And
I think, wasn't it? Or something
no,
like
he
that.
was in
Yeah,
Texas.
Texas, okay.
And it was just fascinating to hear his perspective because he used to be border patrol. So he knows what's going on down there. And unfortunately, this area of addiction is made political, and it's not political. Drugs don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican. They could care less. They don't care if you are Catholic, Christian, Jewish, Muslim. It doesn't matter. And so people need to understand that addiction affects everybody. And I was thinking when you asked your question before that one of the things I think I learned more than anything else is when I came into this podcast, I had the misconception that when you talk about a heroin addict, you're talking about the dirty homeless guy under the bridge. And that is a complete and total misconception. And addiction can affect any economic level and any socio strata in our community, in our society. And I really learned a lot. I have learned way more about addiction than I knew. And I thought I knew a lot. I thought I did. I knew some people who worked for rehabs. I thought I knew. No way.
Speaks to a power of an open mind too. I think being open and what a powerful place that is to work from as well. And then, continue to carry on. I have a mentor who likes to say, and this is in the business world or the coaching world, and it speaks to a comment you said earlier, is that oftentimes we don't need to be taught something new. We just need to be reminded.
That's
It's
right.
all right. It's like, hey, you don't need anything new. You just need to be reminded that persistence is the key. Starting is the key, right?
Yeah.
And or whatever those messages are of addiction, someone new can say the same message, perhaps from a different light, or when the person is ready, the miracle appears, or you hear those sorts of things. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you said something very interesting. You said, hey, we have a small email marketing company. That's super cool. I had no idea. Perhaps if we have time, we can dive into that, but it seems like we won't. But you said, hey, the three main things about podcasting are the equipment. Number two, you said how to get people to listen and watch. And then was the third one how to get people on, or I missed the third one, or did I cover what were the three?
I think that was you, Steve.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
that was
don't
you,
remember
Steve.
what I said.
Yeah, you said.
Well, they're
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
the aspects to it of, doing social media, to, uh, I think maybe just picking a subject that ideally you're passionate about. There's a ton of podcasts, a lot of uh, real estate finance people do podcasts, and some of them give up fairly quickly. Although our niche is small, right? It's not although it's growing, unfortunately, right? It's, you know, I mean,
Yes.
it's
It's the nature of the
it's
nature
it's
of
the
the world
nature of
these
it,
days.
right? Uh, Persistence, you know,
Yeah.
it was just kind of a key for us. But the
Yeah.
learning curve was we took the time to educate ourselves, get the equipment, set it up, dived in, right? We didn't wait for people to say much and just kind of kept at it. And it is true, all the rules of marketing apply anyway to a podcast. You know, there has to be a value. Podcast has got to be interesting, right? Or, you know, people tune it out. So,
Yeah.
and we send out an email after every single episode to all of our followers and keep them abreast. So those marketing basics stay in.
And some people say like, "Oh, how did you get that person or or this person on the podcast?" You start with people you know.
Mhm.
I mean, that's really what we did. We had met Pam Bondi. We knew her. And we started mostly with people that we knew, and then you just ask them, "Who do you know? We should get on the podcast." And then it's not you calling cold, it's the person you're like Mischa, if I asked you who should I get on the podcast and you say you should get Joe, then I say, "Will you hook us up?"
Right.
And then, you're trusted, Mischa, so you hook us up with Joe, and we ask Joe, and Joe goes, "Sure." And then we do the same thing with Joe, and we say, "Who do you know, Joe, that should be on the podcast?" But we started really with people that we knew. And I think with anybody who's starting a podcast, you can start with people that you know. You know people that you're friends with who have probably similar likes to you. So if you're going to do a podcast about cats, cat lovers. So you ask your friends who are cat lovers.
Such a great point. Again, everybody listening and watching, go to patreon.com/the addiction podcast, and you can join the community. You can donate to the cause. You can help spread the message of recovery and support Joanie and Steve Sigal here. I want to touch on something, and you have made it very clear in all the times that I've talked to you and all the content that I've seen about you that you are here with this podcast. Your goal is to spread the message of hope with that
Mhm.
podcast and to serve and help and to hopefully help turn the tide positively on addiction. But from a marketing standpoint, so you do have, I don't know if it's a sponsorship, but there's in recovery there's the idea of interventions, right? So I believe you make Bobby Newman available. His phone number 866-989-4499. Free plug for you, Bobby. But is that, and again, you are here to serve, and you're not doing what you do in this instance for money, but does that help support the cause? Or is that a paid relationship? Is this okay for me to ask you this?
It's okay. We
It
absolutely
does, and
true.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way to, there's various ways to monetize your podcast. The first one is advertising in most cases, right? Uh, and so we happen to know, we knew one of he's like a famous interventionist who was doing it for 25 years. Said, "Hey, it's like, who wants to reach our demographic?" Right. So he was there. And then obviously we're in the midst of setting up our Patreon so that we can expand uh, that message. It's primarily, you can have a sponsor for the entire podcast. You can have somebody's just advertising in 4 consecutive episodes, right? Uh, it's not everybody is Joe Rogan, right? So
Yes.
you're not gonna sign a
And
$200 million
really,
deal.
Mischa, one of the reasons we're kind of switching over to Patreon is, we feel like some of our listeners, maybe they want to say something about addiction, or maybe they want to take more responsibility, or they want to do something about it, but they don't want a podcast. They don't want to get in front of a camera. Maybe they don't even want to make themselves known. But by being one of our patrons and making a small donation every month, you're helping. You're helping fight the war against addiction, because that's what we do on a weekly basis. whether we're talking to a parent, whether we're talking to some ladies like today who are sort of social workers, if you will, and work with the homeless who also have addiction problems, you can be part of the fight. You can just know that you're doing something about it. And I think that we've kind of come to the point where we want to offer that opportunity for people because we think they want to help. We think everybody wants to help.
Yeah, there is a large, I have to believe, a large body of people that want to help, that have been impacted somehow, whether it's 1 degree of separation, 2 degree, 3 degrees of separation. Even in a huge amount of our communities these days, homeless populations are migrating around, growing, and
Yep.
some of that is addiction.
A
And
lot of it is.
And so for less than the cost of a venti latte, you can be a patron of our podcast and you are supporting what we do, and I just think there's a lot of people that will be meaningful to them because they can say, I'm doing something about it. Small though it may be, I'm doing something about it.
love it. Patreon.com/the addiction podcast. Again, patreon.com/the addiction podcast. And you can donate a little bit, a vente, perhaps get a monthly donations, all sorts of things. You can donate
Mhm.
more if you have more resources. You said something else very interesting about podcasting. You said, hey, it fits our lifestyle. And let's talk about your guys' lifestyle because you two are amazing. I started digging a little bit and I'm like, I have to know who had me on their podcast and who am I getting on here? And Joanie, you're relatively famous in the singing world in your community. And yeah, go ahead.
I grew up singing. My dad was in the Air Force, and my mother was an unbelievable musician. One of those people that if you said, play Moon River, she'd play it. And if you said that's too low a key, she'd play it in a higher key. I mean, just an amazing musician. And so every base that we went to, she was always involved in the choir. And so I became involved in the choir at 9 years old. And so I've always sung and I've always been an entertainer. And interestingly enough, when we first were told about this whole medium of podcasting, I went, well, I can do that. I know how to talk to people. I know how to get on camera and, look at people and talk to people. And that's kind of how we did this because, what do you need to podcast? Yeah, it's great if you have a studio, but basically you need a microphone and a camera if you're going to do video and an internet connection. And that's the totality of it. And so it definitely fit our lifestyle. I am in the back bedroom in what's called the podcast room where I record the interviews and I do the editing. And Steve is at the complete other end of the house sitting at his desk.
Right. So it did fit our lifestyle. We were both in the corporate world. Joanie was an assistant in a very large financial firm, and I was a vice president of marketing in a very large reseller to the software, federal, largest in the nation, right? And we went public, and I went, it's time for me to retire, right? That lasted 2 weeks, right?
Mm.
And we just had to say, let's take some of our expertise. Let's, we wanted, by that time you're starting to look at like our grandkids, it's a different thing. We go, well, how do we shape our own life here around what we want? We don't want a 9 to 5 anymore. That's not saying that's not a good thing for some people, right? And so we shaped it all around that. Even a couple of the other projects we have are all shaped around working out of our house. And it's funny because at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I may show up at a salon to get a haircut. And she says, what are you doing? I'm getting a haircut. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? The downside of working out of your house is at midnight or 1 o'clock. Where Joanie, what are you doing?
He's
up?
still working.
Right? I'm still working, right? You never leave your office, right?
It's
I'm sure
calling us.
you understand that, but it's the lifestyle that we chose that we like, and we have all 4 of our grandkids, within a couple miles here, and babysitting stuff, but we never leave this responsibility. And Joanie's very active in the community, as am I. So we've been lucky in that regard.
And we've been married almost 46 years. It'll be 46 years in May,
Yeah.
and we still like each other.
Yeah.
And he
How about
still
that?
makes me laugh. He made me laugh so hard the other night.
Yeah, you don't
But,
have to tell me about that.
no, that's fine. But
Hey, you are podcasting from other rooms, though. Let's point
we
that
are.
out.
Well,
Yeah.
that's just because if I go, because my desk, my actual work desk is like kind of like an L from him, but there's too much echo if I go to that
Oh.
computer. So that's why I'm back here in the podcast room all by my lonesome, except for I used to have a little red dog under the desk.
Oh.
She's not there right now.
So, Steve, let me
Um,
ask you a question quick.
Sure.
Okay, so your company went public and you in effect had an opportunity to retire due to stock options, what have you. What year was that?
94,
No.
93,
No,
80s.
it was in the 80s, honey.
Yeah.
Wow.
In the
It's like
80s.
87, I think.
And then
Yeah. It
and
was
then
in
you
the
had
heyday of computers. I remember getting into the whole computer industry. I lived in Los Angeles, and a friend of mine lived in New Hampshire, right? And he calls me up one day, says, "Hey, how would you like to come to New Hampshire and get involved in the computer industry?" And I go, "Yeah, I don't know if that's going to work. I mean, computers, maybe, And so they flew me out to New Hampshire, and I moved there and with my wife, and everybody else had a four-wheel drive. I had a Cadillac because I didn't know any. Now you would slide around, right? And I finally learned that, and then built that company. And then I was recruited to be in a company in just outside of Washington, D.C., and as vice president of marketing. I had 35 staff. I had a $12 million budget. And we built that into a powerhouse. And you're right. And then at that point, we went public. I made some money, and I said, "Let's move." So, yeah.
That's amazing. And I did some more digging and I saw that you two have been very active in your communities from a giving standpoint with your music, with Joanie, you traveling with your church and singing in your band to a fairly high level and a pretty significant degree. So I, it, I want to speak to the fact that you two give to your community. You're committed to community. You're committed to what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, giving back, but uh, serving, and
Yeah.
you're passionate about it. So this podcast isn't a one-off thing. It is
No,
your lifestyle.
no,
No,
Joanie,
it's
been on the
true.
board.
I've been on the board of Clearwater Jazz Holiday for over 20 years, and I'm the education chair because while Clearwater Jazz Holiday is known for a huge concert that's every October, an outdoor concert for 4 days, we also have a very strong education component, and we give scholarships to high school seniors who are going to go off to college and study jazz music and maybe jazz music education. And we go into schools and into recreation centers, and we teach kids about jazz. Now I say we, I'm not the one who goes in, but it comes under me as the education chair, and I've done that for 20 years. And I also host a large charity fashion show once a year, and we give the bulk of the proceeds to the Police Athletic League because there is a police athletic league near where we live, and pretty much if you drive around that area, that physical area, it's like crack house after crack house after crack house. And these the police athletic league has offered these kids the kind of the glimpse of a better life and the tools to live a better life. So the fashion show benefits them.
Mhm.
It's what
That's
I do.
amazing.
I do
That's
stuff.
amazing. Yeah, and two interesting things that I was told before we hit record. Steve, you said Joanie could have been on Broadway, perhaps. Maybe give me a 2 or 3 minute riff on that, Steve.
Yeah, she could have. I mean, she sang with another guy for a bunch of concerts here. She sang on a cruise ship for a while, standing ovations, right? And then, she had to balance it so that, she didn't have to head off to New York. right? And decided this path that keeps her singing. She does a couple concerts a year, Christmas and so forth for the community. And then her jazz holiday thing is, it's a huge operation down here. So, yeah.
Cool. And then lastly, I wanted to make sure to touch on something else. These two just continue to give nuggets. They're like, oh yeah, there's this. Oh yeah, there's this. And then literally they said to me right before I hit record, oh yeah, we've got this Facebook group called Silver Hair Foxes, a woman's creative approach to aging. A woman's creative approach to aging. And it just has 239,000 0.9 thousand members, 239,000, verging on 240,000 members. So, oh my gosh, let's talk about rebirth, vitality. I mean, you guys are living your best life. You want to talk about silver hair foxes for a second, or growing that? Or
I'll tell you how that came
Create.
about. I used to dye my hair very dark brown. And so when I was in my mid 50s, I had these, every 2 weeks, I had these white roots. And I would say to my hairdressers, I want to go gray. And they'd say, no, 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 no. It's going to make you look too old. And finally, I said, I'm going gray. And so I transitioned. Now I went blonde first, which I didn't like, and Steve did. But anyway, but what occurred to me was that I didn't know many women who had transitioned, and I really on a lark started Silver Hair Foxes to kind of give, at the time we allowed men in, but now it's just women, but to give them a place where, when they, it's amazing. These women will come on there and they'll go, yeah, somebody looked at me and said, oh, you're just letting yourself go. I mean, it's amazing the stereotypes that people have on, not so much anymore, but when I started the group, which was about 6 years ago, on going silver. And the group just grew. I mean, Facebook liked it. So Facebook put it in front of a bunch of women. We went through a growing curve where we had men from other countries in there trying to scammers and create Amazon businesses. So we had to kind of deal with that. And Steve recruited some moderators because at 239,000, we need more than us to just keep an eye on it. The one guiding rule with that group is positivity. And if someone goes on there and makes negative comments, they get a warning and then they're out. We will not allow any negative comments in there. And yeah, but now I've started a new one because what occurred to me, Mischa, was that a lot of my friends who are in my age group, they're never going to go silver. They don't want to. They dye their hair. They like to dye their hair. One of my best friends, she's a Redken specialist. She's a Redken trainer. She has to color her hair. She's never going to go silver. And I feel like some of the members of Silver Hair Foxes maybe don't post because they don't want to get judged because they haven't gone silver yet. So I have a new group. It's called Fab Females Over 50. Same idea, women over 50 supporting other women, private group, women only. But I think I've already gotten a lot of my friends who I know are not going silver. So there you go.
there you go. Hey, you two are amazing. You speak to just the power of giving and serving and bringing vitality to life at any age, and it shows. And I'm amazed that you retired back in the mid 80s, Steve. I'm kind of blown
Like
away.
I said,
I don't
was
think we're ever
at
retired.
2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, temporarily. It was a
Yeah.
2-week retirement number one, but that you two are awesome and amazing. And thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
how you give. Before I hit stop, and I'll ask both of you this question, and perhaps Steve, you can go first. Inevitably, whenever we hit stop, we go, oh, I wished I would have said this, or I really wanted to make this point, or I wanted to talk about this. Is there anything that comes to your mind, Steve?
There's just one or two really small things going back to the podcast, right? Joanie said it's an educational podcast. It was education for us, right? We had no idea the magnitude of the problem. Alcoholism, drugs, opioids, fentanyl, right? It's like I said, it's bittersweet that we have a lineup of people that want to be on, right? And on the good side of that, I'm going to talk about the good side of that. there are parents groups popping up all over the United States now, and they're fighting. And so they need to fight. They need to walk, public policies made by legislators and politicians. You don't want to mess with a mom that has just lost a child, right? So I would just encourage that, right? Because it needs to be a change, right? And all this other stuff is just noise, right? So that's the only point. The only second point is, if there is a basic core successful action we have, let's use the word create. You just keep creating, right? Just ignore as much as possible the bad stuff, right? And just rise above it.
Thank you for that, Steve. Beautiful words. Yeah, amazing. Joanie, anything come to your mind?
I have to second what he says. I mean, when you talk about creating, I mean, we're not going to go off on this, but I make jewelry. I learned how to do watercolor. I'm doing watercolors. I sing, I act, I speak. And it just, I never, and the same way with my silver hair, I never wanted to agree with anybody who would say, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. You're retired, you need to slow down. Not ever going to happen. What you create is what gives you fire in your life, and you have to continue to do it no matter what.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Well said, both of you. Hey, thank you two so much for being on my show, for being the power packed couple that you are. And I'm going to hit stop and we'll say goodbye offline. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's belove.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.